Just give it a minute to make sure everything's up and running on the YouTube end. Had some
Sure.
technical difficulties a few times where it would start but not start or something like that. All right, it looks like we're live. So, Julie, thanks for taking the time to come on and have a conversation with me. Would you mind telling us a little bit about yourself before we get started?
Hey, Tom. Yeah, I am an investigative journalist, a Christian radio host, and also a wife and mother, and been kind of a crazy couple of past years because I've been investigating on corruption and abuse within the evangelical church, and that's my tribe, that's my group, and so it's been a little dicey when you start to expose things that people don't necessarily want to hear, but need to be exposed. So, yeah, it's been a crazy year for me exposing corruption at Harvest Bible Chapel and this big celebrity preacher, James McDonald. Um, but yeah, that's my story a little bit, at least recent history.
Yeah, it's a really admirable goal, and I definitely admire you for doing that and working to try and make the world a better place. It's something I wish I could definitely do, but I'm a lowly YouTuber. So,
Well, you're having substantive conversations, so that's good.
yeah. All right, so to jump right in, I'm an atheist, by which I mean I don't believe there's any reason to believe in the existence of God. Could you tell me some of the reasons that you believe, and then I'd like to tell you my thoughts on those reasons and hear your thoughts on my position.
Sure. Well, I want to start with just my probably number one reason, which isn't something that necessarily lends itself that well to debate, but it is why I believe in God. A big part of it is just that I find that I can't live without God. So I know some would call that the opiate of the people, right? But for me, it's been um, a real relationship with God that I've had for my entire life, but it's had some ups and downs. So I grew up. My parents were missionaries, actually in Zimbabwe. My dad was a surgeon, spent 10 years there. But my parents lived their faith, like they walked the talk. There was no inconsistency between what they said they believed and what I saw in the home, and that was huge to me. And so belief in God was something I grew up with. Accepted Jesus when I was like 6 years old. Went forward at one of these revival meetings, and I actually remember it. I know it's hard to believe, but I do. It was kind of pretty emotional experience for me. And of course, my parents reinforced that with, tell people your story. And so I did that. But then growing up, I had a few questions like anybody would, junior high and high school. I remember my parents gave me some books at one point when I'm like, well, should I really, why should I believe in God? And I remember reading this book called More Than a Carpenter by Josh McDowell. And it was just a tiny little book that had some really convincing arguments. And that was good enough for me. Um, and then my senior year, I remember I had this prayer growing up. I would say, God, I believe in you in my head, right? But I don't feel you. Like, I don't feel like I love you. I know I'm supposed to love you, but I just don't feel anything. And my senior year, I met these kind of crazy charismatics who had dropped out of Oral Roberts University, and they were kind of your 70s druggies, Jesus people who, got off drugs, loved Jesus. And there was something about their faith that attracted me. Like there was a reality to it, a intimacy with God that I was really interested in. And over the course of that year, I had some incredible experiences with God and really met Him through worship and different things. And I remember thinking, this is what I've been searching for my whole life. I mean, it was just huge. And then I went off to Wheaton College, which is kind of the flagship evangelical Christian school, the Harvard of Christian schools, whatever that means. But went there, and I had never encountered what I would call counterfeit Christianity, like people who say, I believe in God, and yet you can't see evidence of it in their life. It just doesn't, their walk and their talk just don't match. And that combined with there was just a real intellectualism, like the way to really know God was to search him and find him intellectually. And that just I found, I wanted to do that because that's what was respected. Um, but I found the more I did that, and any kind of emotional expressions towards God, that was kind of, now I think things have changed at Wheaton. This was many moons ago, but at that time that's just how it was. And my faith just got drier and drier and drier. And I started to feel like, what was that thing that I experienced when I was in high school? Was that just like teenage infatuation or something? Was that just something I'd imagined? And so kind of this emotional, spiritual angst gave way to intellectual doubts. And I started doubting everything. But I remember getting up at like 5 in the morning. I thought, man, if I would just seek God every morning for an hour, then I would find him, right? And the more I would do that, the more distant he seemed, the more dry my faith seemed. It was horrible. And then I sunk into this really bad depression, which, coming from my family, Christians weren't supposed to be depressed. We were supposed to, we're the light of the world, right? The salt of the earth. We should have it all together. And here I was, terribly, horribly depressed, but so ashamed about it that I didn't go to see a counselor. I didn't tell anybody. I would duck into a bathroom 4 and 5 times a day and cry and then try to straighten up and come out like I'm okay. And I wasn't okay. I was falling apart. And it was a really, really miserable time. Graduated from college and got married, and we started attending, oddly enough, Willow Creek Community Church, because it's now one of the churches. They had this big scandal with the founding pastor, Bill Hybels, apparently sexually assaulting some women. But it was at Willow Creek that I remember it was, I don't know, maybe the first or second midweek service we went to. And we were sitting in the balcony. I'll never forget this. Sitting in the balcony, and we were singing "Great Is Thy Faithfulness," which they hardly ever sing hymns at Willow. It's more of like contemporary church, right? And we're singing this song, and even now I get kind of choked up about it. I mean, this was like 30 years ago. Singing this song, and all of a sudden, and I didn't have words for it, but it was like this just boom, unbelievable enveloping of the presence of God. And I'd been in church like this whole entire 4 or 5 year period where God didn't seem so far away. And I just started bawling, right? I just started crying, and of course people around me probably wonder what's going on with her, right? Um, I just started bawling, and it was like right then I recognized it because I'd had that intimacy with God as a high schooler. I had felt that before. I knew what that was, and I knew it was God. And in that moment, I'm sure I would have had clinical depression for 4 years if I'd had it diagnosed. But again, I never went. But in that moment, and people that have depression, kind of forgive me for this because I know some people suffer with this for a lifetime, and I don't have an explanation for why this cured me and theirs didn't. But right then and there, I was cured of this depression. It was like I had that connection with God again. I had a reason to live again. And then I remember after that, I was like kind of afraid, like, is it going to go away? Am I going to come back to feeling that depression again? And so, and so I feared that for a while, and that never happened. And it's not that I haven't had ups and downs and I haven't ever been depressed since then. I mean, this is a long time ago, but that kind of clinical kind of depression where you feel like you can't get out of the hole, that sense that God isn't real, that he isn't with me. I mean, I have enjoyed, and not all Christians, necessarily have this, but I've enjoyed this incredible closeness with God that has sustained me for 30 years. And and so for me, that taught me that whole experience. I don't know why I went through it. I don't know why I came out of it like I did. It did seem that it wasn't me. It was more dependent on God because I was seeking him the whole time. Um, but that has been the thing that sustained me. And so I would say that's my number one reason. There's a couple of other reasons where would be more evidentiary, looking at the evidence for the resurrection would be one, and looking for even the scientific reasons for believing in God would be another. But I want to give you a chance to interact with that because I'm sure you have lots of thoughts. So,
Yeah, that's a really powerful story, and it's really similar to mine in a lot of ways. I was diagnosed with major depression. I've had it since I was a kid,
mm,
and I was brought up Christian, and I prayed like every day, morning and night, asking for God's help because I was expecting a kind of a personal relationship there, having been Christian and having that
yeah,
as a big part of my life for a really long time. But it never really happened because and so in some time in high school, after years and years and years of praying, I just it kind of fizzled out for me, and I stopped believing because my depression and when I was asking for help, I never felt like my prayers were being answered. I never felt that personal connection. So I can really identify with your story, and I don't have any problem with people believing in God if like your prayers were answered. I know that if my prayers were answered and my depression was lifted, I would absolutely be a Christian right now for sure.
Mm,
And
mm,
so personal experience for me, I don't see as an issue at all. And my goal isn't actually to stop people from believing in God. My goal is just to talk about like the philosophical evidential arguments, like you mentioned. I don't think they work. Think they're just bad arguments. But I have no problem with people believing in God, especially for personal experience reasons, because I know that if I had those experiences, I would believe in God too. So I see
yeah.
no problem with anything in your story, and I think it's a really powerful emotional story. And I'm glad to hear that you overcame your depression, and hope more people can too. Especially if praying to God gets people over depression, then by all means do it. I think it's if it works, do it. And I
Well,
wish
and
it
the
did for
weird
me.
thing is it wasn't when I was working so hard at it. That's what was so odd. And I don't know why that is, you know. I do know afterwards, I read this book by Phil Yancey called Disappointment with God. And I'm always a little reluctant to recommend this book because I've recommended it to some people and they're like, that was the most depressing book I've ever read. But for me, it helped because for the longest time, I'm like, why did I go through that? Why? What did I do to deserve that? Right. And Phil brings up the story of Job. And, you know, in the book of Job, we read about how there's this wager between God and Satan. And Satan says, well, you know, Job, he only serves you because look at his life. It's so great. He's rich. He has kids. He has, you know, everything about his life has turned out well. You take that away from him and he will curse you. And and so then you just see this unfolding of Satan taking away thing after thing after thing from Job. He loses his entire family, and then he loses his wealth, loses his own health, everything. And everybody's like, just curse God and die, and he doesn't. But in the end, when God comes to him, and and Job's like, you know, what the heck? Why did this happen? You know, why did you do this to me? And God doesn't give him the answer. God doesn't say, well, there's this whole cosmic, you know, wager going on that you don't know about, and he basically says, were you there when I laid the earth's foundations? You know, did you put the Leviathan in the water? You know, I mean, did you do all these things? How can I explain these things to you? They're beyond you. And Job is kind of left there with, yeah, I guess I don't understand it all. And that that helped me to just say, all right, God, I can admit my intellectual, you know, my intellectual boundaries. I just have limitations. And so I can accept you did something that I don't fully understand. And I was allowed to have 4 or 5 horrible years, which is nothing compared to what some people go through. I mean, the problem with suffering is just hard. It's just really hard. And the only thing that makes it easier for me is the fact that I serve a savior who suffered too, and probably worse than any of us have suffered. So that helps me that he took on our suffering, which, you know, our sin was responsible for. Um, but these are hard questions. They're really hard. And when you talk about your own depression, oh, I mean, that's just hard. I'm sorry. And I'm sorry that it hasn't been lifted for you. Um, that's really hard.
Yeah, the problem for suffering is a really big one for me. It's probably the biggest hurdle for me actually believing in a God. I kind of felt the same way of that maybe I'm just being tested, or there's some cosmic reason for all of my suffering, and that it's going to work out in the end. But after years and years and years of really thinking about that, it felt like I was being used like a chess piece on a board, and I really didn't like that. Like for me, it feels really immoral to be used without your consent. I think if there was really an all good, all powerful God, he would have given us the option and said, you could be a chess piece on my board if you choose to, but if you want, I'll give you the option to just opt out and just go to like your own universe or do whatever. And I think forcing us to be in this world and forcing us to be his chess pieces without our consent, I think that's really immoral. And so it's hard for me to believe there is an all good, all powerful God who would force us into this chess game without our consent. And so for me, that's one of the biggest problems I see with trying to believe in an all good, all powerful God.
If we're, I mean, if yeah, if it's just a chess piece, then I would agree with you. I don't think that's what it is. I do think we have sinned against a holy God. which to us, it's like, that's no big deal, right? I mean, we sin, everybody sins, but that's because we're comparing ourselves to each other instead of to a God who was sinless, who created mankind to live in fellowship with him. And we thumbed our noses at him. We said, no, we want to live life on our terms, our way. And so he said, okay, he gave us what we wanted, but I think we didn't know what we really wanted. So, I mean, there is culpability for human beings in this whole thing. We do, I think, deserve hell. Um, and so, for me, when I come to that point where I realize my sin is severe enough against a holy God that I don't deserve anything from Him, then anything I get is something undeserved. Um, I think He's always wanted love relationship. I mean, it says in Scripture He doesn't want anybody to perish, right? He wants our heart. He wants our love, and yet our sin separates us from Him. And He's made a way. He's made a way to be in communion with Him, but you know, uh, it's hard. I think there's one basic choice in life, and that's between pride and worship. And it is hard for us to bend our knee. It is really hard. It's still hard for me. I still want my way, um, even though I usually, when I get it, it's not exactly what I intended.
Well, for me, it's hard to accept that because God could have just given us the option. Like before we came to this earth, being born here, He could have said, "Would you like to go to this world with all the suffering, or would you like to go to a different world without the suffering?" And so He could have still had the free will without the suffering, and still had the sin. It could still be a sinner and just be like, "I'd rather not be a part of that world. I'll still be separated from God. I can still be a part of hell or whatever, but I don't need to be forced into this world with this suffering." There seems to me to be a more moral option that God didn't choose.
So you're saying there could be free will without suffering?
Hmm.
Yeah, I don't think that's possible though, because if humans have free will and they choose sin, um, then that's going to come with the effects of sin, which are selfishness, which is um, malice. I mean, all of those things, which we cause our own pain and suffering, right? I mean, we do it to each other. Um, and there's some natural suffering. I mean, that what it did to the world. But if God is both holy and just, then he can't wink at our sin and overlook our sin any more than a good judge. I mean, we just had a case here in the Chicagoland area where there was this youth pastor who had been sexting kids, and he just got off. And a lot of people feel it's because he had a really good lawyer and he's from an affluent family. And I'm no expert in the law, but it did seem like there were 2,000 texts and they were pretty, I don't know. I don't know how he got off, to be honest. And people are really angry at that because they're like, that's wrong. That needs to be punished. That judge was wrong to let that guy off. Um, and so I think if God is both holy and He is both just and He is bound to His own nature, then sin must have a punishment and wrongdoing must have a punishment. And so naturally suffering comes. I don't think even if God wanted to set up a system where there was no consequence for our rebellion against Him, I don't think He could, because He's bound to His nature, and His nature underlies the foundations of the universe and the way that the world runs. I mean, that would be a nice world where we could have chosen that maybe and there'd be no consequences, but I don't think that's possible.
Well, it'd be possible for me to like essentially take a spaceship and just fly to a different universe or something. And God could have, I imagine, just given us each a universe of our own and said, "Okay, you can go there and just be left alone." That seems possible. I don't see any reason why that wouldn't be possible. So we can still have the sin and the suffering and just be essentially optional for you to interact with other people. So you could still have all the selfishness and the greed. It would just be you'd be far enough away from other people that you wouldn't have to interact with that if you didn't choose to. And to me, that seems like a much better option than just forcing everyone to be in this one world with people like Hitler and without their consent. Like if I could have chosen, say, go to my own planet with without that, I would have done that for sure. And that seems significantly more moral than just forcing me to be here without my consent.
I guess I don't know we have a right to tell God how to set things up. I mean, he put us here with other people just like us. I remember there was this, there was a friend of mine. He was really into New Age. This is uh, probably 25, 30 years ago. He's really in the New Age movement. And our pastor happened to be preaching on the New Age movement. And so I invited him to come to church. It's funny how people will like, for nothing else will they stand you up except for church, right? So he didn't show up. He stood me up. But I got a tape of the sermon because it was really good. And I remember giving it to him. And he said the first time he listened to it, it made him really mad. Um, but he kept listening to it. And it made him really mad though, because he was like, well, what right does God have to like say that this is how things will work? What right does he have? And then he said, the more I listened to it, it kind of began to sink into me that if he was the God of the universe and he created everything and he was the essence from which all life came, that maybe he had a right to set things up the way that he determined because he's God and we're not. We're the creature, he's the creator. And I think he's done what he's done because he loves us, because he wants fellowship with us. And he has taken responsibility for sin. I mean, God came and paid the penalty himself for our sins so that we can be forgiven, have eternal life. But then for us to say we don't like that way, we want a different way, we want to make up our own rules. I mean, that is the essence, isn't it, of the sin in the garden. No, I don't want to play by your rules. I want to make my own rules.
I mean, it seems like even if we could have, it seems like there's a more moral option. Just give us the choice instead of forcing us to do this without our consent. Because it seems like even if God has the right to do that, it's still less moral to do it that way. Seems like if I just give any person any option, like you could choose to eat the apple or I'm going to force you to eat the apple. Forcing someone to eat the apple is always more immoral than giving them the choice. So it seems like if there's always a more moral option that God didn't choose, well then how could God possibly be all good? Because even if he
But
did choose to do it, if he has the right to do that, that still means he's immoral for doing it because there's a more moral option he could choose.
that's what I don't understand. I don't understand the more moral option. He didn't force us to eat the apple.
I didn't eat the apple. I was born here without my consent.
Oh, you're saying being born with original sin is unfair.
Right, because I didn't choose it. I didn't volunteer to be a part of this system. I was forced into this system without my consent. And the more moral option is to say, would you like to be a part of this system that God created, or would you like to opt out and not be a part of the system and be a part of a different system?
Yeah, and that's I just your premise I think is faulty because I don't think God created the system. I mean, I am the way, the truth, and the life, right? I mean, that's what Jesus said. God is the truth. It's not he created the truth. He is the truth. He is just. God is holy. God is love. And so you have these characteristics existing in God that he's bound to his own nature. I mean, we like to think of it in kind of Superman kind of terms, like God can do anything. So he could create any system he wants, but that's not true. He can't. He's bound to his own nature. And so what he did is he decided to create objects of love, which are us, because you can't be love and not have objects of love. Um, so he creates us and he creates a garden, an idyllic garden for us to live in. And we chose to violate, and the consequences are devastating, absolutely devastating. But again, he took responsibility for it, even though he didn't have to. I don't see anything immoral in that. And I don't think, I think the hypothetical of God creating a system that violates his own nature isn't a true hypothetical. Does
Well,
that
I
make sense?
don't see how it violates his nature because these are things we could potentially do in the future if we have the technological capabilities. We could essentially give someone their own world and like the. Have you seen the movie The Matrix?
Oh, yeah.
So we could exist in a computer program and give everyone their own world essentially, and it's impossible to hurt anybody else if you choose to live in this system. Because if you like throw a coffee mug at somebody, it'll just pass through them like they're a ghost or something. So it seems like this is all possible if we can do it. So if we can do it, it seems really strange to say that God couldn't do it. Or even in the case of Adam and Eve choosing to eat the apple, then I grant that they should They chose that world and they should live in it, but I didn't. So why am I being punished for their sin? Why is it against God's nature to give me the option to not be a part of this world?
Yeah, I mean, one, I don't think we can get to any world where we can escape God. God is everywhere. And if we could, we would cease to exist because he is the essence of life. So I think, again, I think that's a hypothetical that's not possible. And I think if we did get to that world, it would be so horrific because right now we're living under grace, whether we realize it or not. We still live in a world that's good. It still has the imprint of good. Why does food taste good? Why are there so many varieties of food? God could have made one, right? He could have made it really bland. We live in a good world. It's marred by sin, but it's still a good world. Most of us are alive because we've chosen to be alive because we like living. You know, we like our life. It is a beautiful creation. So I see God's goodness stamped on all of it. And I think if we were to have a hypothetical, what I'm hearing you say, if I'm understanding correctly, is a hypothetical world where there is no God and where there is no consequence and where there's a whole different moral system. And I don't think that's possible. Um, and if it were, we wouldn't even like it. But we're contingent on him for life. I mean, that's just that's not possible.
I mean, it seems really strange for you to say that because we can do it. I mean, we can literally build this exact system I'm describing in a computer game right now, today. So it is definitely possible. But the question is if it's possible for us, why isn't it possible for God? Because it seems so simple. It's so easy. We can do it. We're going to do it in the future, essentially. So why couldn't God have just skipped all the middlemen? If we can do it, then he must have been able to do it.
You mean a world where like we're able to create our own reality and escape the reality that's what is real?
No, just essentially changing the laws of physics a little bit. So like if it's just makes things optional. So it's and we still have all of the stuff that we have in this world, it just becomes optional.
But we're
So
not talking physics, we're talking metaphysics. I mean, right? We're talking spiritual realities. We're
well, no, I don't
talking
want to change any about the spiritual reality because I don't. I just want to change the physics stuff, none of the metaphysics stuff. So just changing the laws of physics a little bit, it's possible. We can keep all of the sin, we can keep all of the greed and the selfishness and the internal suffering, but we just get rid of the external suffering, the part where someone tries to shoot you with a gun, it doesn't work. It's, but so it seems to me all of the stuff that God did we can keep, but we don't need to
Mhm.
keep the physical stuff of this world. The laws of physics can be changed without it being affecting the sin in any way.
Well, basically what you're saying is you'd like to create your own world, right?
Well, I'd just like to have the option to not be a part of this world. So God
Which
could
would
still
be
create
creating
it.
a
God
different
could
world.
create the other one, but
But you'd be creating it. This is a world, you have a world in your imagination that you believe would be better than the world that God created for you. And so you think it's cruel for him not to allow you to create your own reality, correct?
oh well, no. I think I'm asking for two different worlds here, and
Mm-hmm.
God creates both of them. I don't create anything. It'd be cool if I could, but I don't have that power. And God, all I get is the option. I have the option to be a part of this world, the option to be a part of this other world.
But this is so, I mean, you're basically saying, I want a made to order world. So each of us should be able to go to God and say, this is how I want the world to be. And now I want you to make it. So essentially, we're making ourselves God, but we're allowing God to actually do the creating part of it. But we're the ones who are making all the rules and determining everything.
I don't think so. I don't think that's fair because I'm not asking to be God. I'm just asking to have freedom over myself. I want to have the freedom to choose for myself where I go. That's not being God. That's just having a little bit of free choice. That's it.
Well, you do have choice. You're choosing now, but you want more choice.
Yes,
You want,
one more choice. I'd like one more choice. That's it.
well, again, I I think God has the right to be God and I'm not sure that if you got your choice of living all by yourself, a completely isolated, solitary life, that you'd really find it that much better.
I may not. You could be true, but I think that having that option is more moral than having it forced on me. Because that seems to me to be really intuitive about what morality is. It's just having the choice to choose for myself seems to be inherently more moral than being forced against my will to do something, even if I may enjoy that thing.
Well, being forced to be born, I guess you can say that's, I mean, that's what you're saying. You
Well,
don't think it's,
essentially, being
yeah.
forced to be born here, yes, that's the part I disagree with.
Mm. Well, I can't argue with you other than I don't see it that way. And I think God has the right to make the world the way he wants to make it. And it is a beautiful world, but
Parts of it, not all of it.
parts of it, not all of it. And it's, you know what, it's broken this side of eternity. And it always will be. And if it weren't, and I think the fact that we can even long for eternity, for a better world, that says something. There's something he has put eternity in each of our hearts, and we know this isn't it. We just know. And we know it should be more perfect. And we know it should be, people should be more loving. And we know we should be more loving. And we're even disgusted with ourselves and our inability to live up to our own standards. We get it. I think all of us get that. And, uh, and that's part of, like, to me, that just confirms that there is a God. Even the evil confirms that there is a God. It's so illogical. Why was there a Hitler? Why did he do what he did? I mean, it makes no sense outside of there being evil and there really being a God and there really being a Satan. So I can't make any sense of it outside of that.
You also mentioned the historicity. Like from my perspective, I don't think
Mhm.
that I grant mostly that Jesus existed and most of the historical events in the
Yeah.
Gospels, but I don't think that it's reasonable to believe in miracles based off of the testimony. Would you disagree?
To me, the number one reason to believe in Jesus Christ is the resurrection, period. That is the keystone of our faith. That is the prime miracle. If it didn't happen, like the Apostle Paul said, we are the worst, the most to be pitied, right? I mean, it would be pathetic if we believe in something that's not real. And so the resurrection, to me, that's a big one. And so when you look at the resurrection, for me, there are a number of things that make it. Um, one second, I've got a little low power. For some reason, my computer is not powering my phone, so hopefully I won't go black on us here. Um, but sorry. Um, but yeah, when it comes to the resurrection, some of the things that I find really compelling um, are that you have 12 disciples who were in a position to know whether or not Jesus raised from the dead, right? Because all of them claimed to have seen Jesus after he was resurrected. So they would have known. And all of them gave their lives for their faith, every single one of them. Now, we know that people give their lives for things that they believe are true and aren't true. That happens all the time, right? What we don't see is people giving their lives for something that they know is false. At some point, you'd think they'd say, all right, I wanted to start a major world religion, but this isn't turning out so well for me. I'm done, right? But all of them give their lives for it. And I find that remarkable. And you're probably too young because you look a little bit younger than me, but I remember Watergate. I don't really remember it all that well. I remember my parents talking about it and knowing it was something to do with the President Nixon. But uh, I've read Chuck Colson's book, which is a really interesting book um, about how those men tried to keep together a conspiracy, right? The Watergate conspiracy. And they tried to hold it together and keep their stories together and make sure it all panned out. And the whole thing, very quickly, when self-interest, when they saw that it wasn't working out well for them, every single one of them bailed, right? I mean, the whole conspiracy fell apart. So again, for 12 men to hold together a conspiracy to give their lives for something they knew to be false, I find that really difficult to swallow.
Do you think that's different from other religions? Because I could say the same thing about essentially Buddhism, where people experience the karma or the dharma, and they essentially set themselves on fire and protest to try and demonstrate that the evils of the world are something that we should not do or try to make people better. And they give their lives also for those beliefs. So from my perspective, I agree that they believed it was true, but I don't think
Yeah,
that means it was actually true. And it seems like that happens all the time all over the world.
sure it does. Absolutely. We know that people believe in false things and they give their lives for them. The difference is they don't know it's false. The very unique thing about Christianity that other world religions don't really have is that it's all rooted in history. So the Israelite people, the Old Testament, I mean, we know now archaeologists are like, if you want to figure, if you want to find something that's mentioned in the scriptures, go to the scriptures because they've been incredibly accurate. Um, it's rooted in history. Jesus Christ was a real person. So he died. We know he died. We know that from biblical sources. We know from extra biblical sources, which I get that you're not even saying that he didn't. And we know that that body was gone because the Romans didn't want him to be alive, right? I mean, they're the ones that had said it was okay to kill him. The Jews, the Jewish leaders, didn't want him to be alive because they're the ones that urged the Romans to kill him. And then you have you have the Romans putting a seal around this massive stone, putting the body in this tomb, putting this massive stone around it, putting a Roman seal that if you break the Roman seal, that's on threat of death. If you break that seal, who's going to roll that stone away and get him out of there? Who did it? And we know from the first century sources that the soldiers who were on guard there said that while they were asleep, the disciples came and stole the body. Well, if you think about that for a second, they're they're asleep, and somehow the disciples come, who we know the disciples are terrified at this point, right? They think what happened to Jesus is going to happen to them. So they're cowering in fear, but somehow they get there, they roll away this massive stone the whole time the soldiers are asleep. And how do the soldiers know that the disciples did it if they were asleep? So we have this event that happened. We have the disciples saying they saw Jesus resurrected from the dead. We have accounts that were disseminated in the first 2 centuries of Jesus appearing to 500 people. Now we know people have hallucinations, but 500 people don't have the same hallucination at once. That never happens. And so we have witnesses saying. So Christianity really is completely different. It's the only religion that's falsifiable. And so if you can prove the resurrection didn't happen, then Christianity's not real. But if you can't prove that it didn't happen, well, then you can't prove that Christianity isn't real. And you have all this reason to believe that it actually did happen.
Yeah, so from my perspective, I think the body missing from the tomb, I think your camera's actually dying a little bit. So if you fall off, I just want to say thanks for coming on, and I really appreciate the conversation. But
Yeah.
but from my perspective, the 500 people, it happens like it's a communal reinforcement. Like people who see UFOs, they see something flying in space, and someone says, "Oh, that's a UFO. It must be aliens," and everyone kind of jumps on board and says, "Yeah, it's an alien." So the 500 people could have seen something they couldn't explain, and then interpreted that to be Jesus later
Mm-hmm.
on. So we have lots of examples of that happening, where lots of people can experience something that they don't really explain, and then they attribute it to a miracle. So that part, I think, is explainable by natural explanations.
Yeah, but
Um,
that's a really, really specific hallucination, right? That they all saw Jesus. And you don't have like multiple people saying, well, no, that's not what that was. They all supposedly saw Jesus Christ ascending into heaven. I see what you're saying, but I think it's hard to believe that 500 people would have that specific of a recollection of something that's just like the extraterrestrial, where then you get the picture right, and it's like this fuzzy something in the sky that doesn't really look like anything. But to say I saw Jesus Christ, he was there, I saw him ascend, it's pretty specific hallucination.
well, don't we have a lot of those where, like the case of the miracles of Fatima and different miracles from different religions around the world, like Hindu miracles, where there's thousands of people standing in front of like Santi Sai Baba, where he performs miracles, and they all interpret it to be a certain kind of a thing. But then when we watch the video later, it's like, oh, it's just messing around with sand or something.
Yeah, I can't speak to that. Maybe there is. I'm not familiar with that. Um, and if it were taken alone, if that were the only thing, maybe. But it's one of several. several. How do you explain the disciples all giving their lives for this?
Well, I'd explain it the same way that we see Buddhists giving their lives and setting themselves on fire in order to in protest, and the same way we explain the people of Falun Gong who give their lives in order to protest against China for their religion, and the people
Mm-hmm.
of Hinduism who give their lives in protest against the corrupt states of India and fight between India and Pakistan and the Islamic conflicts they have in those areas. Because there's
Mm-hmm.
lots of people all around the world who give their lives for what they really believe. So
Yeah.
I definitely think it's reasonable that they believed and gave their lives for their beliefs, but I don't think that makes it true. I don't think that adds or makes it more likely to be true.
But the fact that they knew it was false, they would have known it was false. I mean, they didn't have just like one appearance with him. I mean, they saw him actually cook food and eat it in front of them. It wasn't just some like apparition. Those are the claims that the disciples made.
But
They all knew it was
do you know what a
false.
bereavement delusion is? A bereavement hallucination?
I'm not familiar with that.
It's a phenomenon that people experience where if someone's really important to you, a loved one dies, about 15% of the population can hear them or see them afterwards as a part of a really common hallucination that most people have. And it's pretty well studied that everyone has this. And so if you have someone who you think to be like a god and you worship him and he dies and he claimed to have come back, the fact that you have a bereavement delusion and see that person afterwards, see visions of them and hear their voice is actually pretty common. So to me, that doesn't seem like it's a miracle. It just seems like it's a psychological phenomenon that we already know about that happens all the time.
So, okay, so which is the most reasonable explanation that something that occurs in 15% of the population, in this case, occurs in 100% of the disciples, so all 12 of them, and they have the exact same bereavement illusion, right? The exact same one. Is it more reasonable to believe that, or is it more reasonable to say, wow, 12 people died for something that they say they saw? They saw Jesus resurrected from the grave. They actually say they sat down and ate with him. I mean, it's not just like, oh, we saw an apparition. We sat down and ate with him. We saw him come through the wall. We have 12 people who said we saw him come through the wall or just appear in the room, which he had to, it says the doors were locked. So I'm assuming he came through the wall or somehow appears in their room. They eat a meal with him. But then you also have these tongues of fire coming down, right? And the Holy Spirit being given to them. And in one day, 3,000 people coming to Christ. I mean, you have an entire world religion that explosively grows through the Roman Empire. In fact, it becomes the chief religion eventually of the Roman Empire. I mean, what is more reasonable to believe that these were, you know, again, 12 men who 100% of them have this bereavement uh, delusion, or that these men were actually quite sane, quite knowing what they saw, and they saw Jesus resurrected. And that's the only explanation for this explosive world religion based on a fact, not a belief, not a claim that nobody knew, but based on something that either they saw or they didn't see.
Well, for me,
I, yeah, go ahead.
yeah, for me, it's like it seems to be the same as like most of the claims. Like Christianity isn't even the fastest growing religion. The fastest growing religion was Falun Gong in China, and it happened much faster. So I don't think that the rate at which it grew indicates it was true, just more that lots of people believed it, and there are some very um, emotionally engaged people who supported it and got a lot of people to follow them. So I don't think that indicates it was true. And there are lots and lots of cases where groups of people can see apparitions and that they all account the same way. And like the Ouija board, essentially, if someone's on a Ouija board and it moves around and they claim there's a ghost and they see something happen in the room that it can't explain, like, ah, there was a ghost and we gave it the specific name because we saw it on the Ouija board or whatever. Those kind of things happen all the time. So the fact that the
Really?
disciples, yeah,
Where 12 people have the exact same, and they're so sure of it that they suffer and die. I mean, that doesn't happen hardly. I mean, I can't think of any situation where somebody was in a position to know whether or not something was true and then died for it, and all, a group of people all did it. I don't, to me, that is unique in history. And can't think of one world religion that is based on that kind of historical fact that either happened or didn't happen, and um, and has that kind of evidence for it. I can't think of any other religions. I mean, maybe you can, but I can't think of any other religions where you have so many people that set out to disprove it and end up becoming Christians, like C.S. Lewis. And I mean, there's a bunch of, like Lee Strobel would be a more modern contemporary one who set out to say, "Oh, this has got to be bogus." I actually know Lee because we're both journalists in Chicago, and we both went to the same church for a while. And I mean, Lee's a very intelligent man. Went to Didn't get a law degree from Yale Law School, but got, I think it was a certificate or whatever, so he could be legal editor at Chicago Tribune. He's trained in investigative reporting. He's a bright guy. I'm an investigative reporter. You know, I remember Lee used to joke that they had a plaque up on the wall that said, "If your mother loves you, check it out." We're trained to be skeptical. I'm a skeptical person. I don't believe in a whole lot of things. I check them out. And the Christian faith, it stands scrutiny. I mean, you can come up with, I think, very implausible explanations for what happened with the resurrection. I just think they're very implausible. And if you look at the most logical answer, we just don't want to believe it. It's like with intelligent design. We don't, scientists can't figure out the complexity of life. I mean, have you ever watched the movie Contact?
Yep.
Okay.
Jodie Foster.
Jodie Foster plays Dr. Ellie Arroway, I think it is. Um, so she's a doctor in the whole SETI program, Search for Extraterrestrial Intelligence, right? And you remember they have these some sort of satellites set up to receive signals from outer space, right? So they're training these satellites on space, and all of a sudden they start getting these signals. You remember this? And at first they think they're just random, right? Not an indication of anything. And then they figure out, oh my goodness, these signals are prime numbers, right? These are prime numbers. And that's all it takes for them. That's all it takes for them to figure out that this is an unseen intelligent being out there. They say, yeah, that makes sense. These are all prime numbers from like 2 to 101 or something. I've never met somebody that says, well, that's ridiculous. I mean, they could have just come up with those randomly, and it's prime numbers. No, we get that was intelligence, right? But then it's even more than that. They find out that these are actually blueprints from outer space to build a spaceship, and they actually build this spaceship. Now, if you would take now initially when the theory of evolution, Darwin put that forth, which again doesn't come up with any explanation for how the original building blocks of life came together. But we didn't realize at that point how complex life was. But in every cell of our body, if you would take that same satellite, metaphysically speaking, and just train that on one of the cells in our body, you would find this incredible, not just prime numbers. We're talking an entire blueprint of life that's reproducible. I mean, it is so complex that scientists are still getting a complete wrap on getting their heads around exactly what's all in DNA. It is so complex. And to think that blueprint for life somehow just randomly appeared, is that more plausible than saying, just like these scientists did in that movie, no, this is a blueprint from some intelligent being? To me, it requires more faith to believe that just came into being. It is so complex. It is so beautiful. Can we
Yeah,
really?
I definitely understand what you're saying. But from my perspective, when I look at the science, like we can see RNA, the building blocks of DNA, being made on clay. We've done the experiments to show that this can happen, of how it can form spontaneously on just natural processes. So I don't think it's hard to say that was unlikely. And it seems, since we know of a natural process that can occur, that can do it, it seems more likely to believe that it did happen just by natural processes than by a being beyond our knowledge that it created it. But to go back to your historicity example, like if we had 12 people who came to us in a courtroom and said that they saw a miracle or magic or a mythical creature, paranormal, supernatural, any of those things, the court would just throw it out. It wouldn't like consider them their testimony sufficient evidence to justify magic or miracles or unicorns or things, as far as I know, because there's no precedent for it. In order for testimony to be justifiable to believe in miracles, you need something in addition to that. You need like empirical evidence of some kind. Like if I told you I saw a dog, that would be reasonable to believe. But if I told you I saw a unicorn, that wouldn't be reasonable to believe. Even if you have 500 people who attest to it and 12 people who give their lives for it, it still wouldn't be reasonable to believe there was a unicorn there or Bigfoot just because they were really convicted in their belief. You would need something else. For a court to believe that there was actually a Bigfoot, you need like bring in Bigfoot or something. But the testimony, no matter how convicted they were, I don't think would be accepted in a court of law. I mean, as a journalist, would you disagree with that?
Um, well, as a journalist, I don't deal in the court of law. I deal in the court of public opinion. And as a journalist, I report what eyewitnesses tell me, right? And actually, to me, the first journalist is Luke. Because what did, you read the Gospel of Luke, and Luke says, not that I was there, right? He says, what I have done, he's writing to this guy called Theophilus, and he says, what I've done is I have carefully researched all these things and written an orderly account so that you might know that what you're reading is true. Which, again, read the other holy books and see if that's the kind of rooting in evidence and witnesses and historicity. Christianity, the Bible, is very unique. It's not like other holy books. It's got spiritual stuff in it, yes, but it's got historical stuff. It's like this combination of real life, real world events with also the supernatural. So you have the natural and the supernatural. So so what so what I deal with, the same thing Luke dealt with, is I deal with eyewitnesses. And most of my stories, if I get documents, I'm thrilled, right? I mean, that's awesome. If I get a videotape of what actually happened, that's awesome. If I get audio tape, like we actually got audio of James McDonald on a hot mic, this pastor that I was investigating, saying really vile stuff. That was beautiful because once that was aired, it's like I can get 25 people in here to say that's what he's really like. Um, but you're hearing it for yourself. But I would say that kind of stuff. In fact, when I got that tape, I remember my buddy at Chicago Tribune. He's not there anymore, but he was there for like 20 years. But he's a believer. And when I called him and I said I'd gotten this audio, he was like, Julie, oh my word, in 20 years, I've never gotten anything like that. And to me, again, I have a supernatural worldview. You're saying from your natural worldview, this doesn't fit, so I'm going to throw it out. I'm saying I have a supernatural worldview. When that happens, I say, God, God did something. He just handed me this incredible evidence, right? But most of the time, I don't get that. Most of the time, what I have to rely on is the witness, a credible witness who is an eyewitness to an event, and usually not just one. I mean, if you get one credible witness, that's great. But usually try to get some corroborating witnesses. But that's usually what I'm dealing with. I'm usually not dealing with video or audio or even documentation. Most of the time, I'm dealing with witnesses. And if I can get a credible witness to say they saw something, and then another credible witness saying they saw the exact same thing, and if I could get 12 witnesses saying they saw the same thing, and then they're not insane. They all seem to be sane guys. They seem credible. They seem to make sense. They actually wrote these incredible accounts. Like you read scriptures, do they sound like insane men? No, they sound credible. Um, and
Well,
then
they didn't actually write those. Those came like several dozen years later from multiple sources, but I think it was.
well, we can we can argue that the authors of the Gospels. I do believe that the disciples wrote them. I think there's decent evidence for that. Um, but but the point is, I don't think a bunch of crazy men could have started a religion. And if I have a witness that tells me, um, if I have a witness that tells me, and I can see in their life they've suffered for what they're the story they're telling me, that lends unbelievable credibility to it. And I mean, I'm trying to think if I've ever had a witness who has suffered to get the truth out and tell me a story that I've found out was false. I mean, that just doesn't happen. It just doesn't, unless they're covering for somebody else or there's some ulterior motive there. But yeah, that's eyewitness testimony is powerful. It's how most of us believe what we believe.
Oh, right, absolutely. But would you like accept the eyewitness testimony of the people who saw the alien encounters, or who were abducted by aliens, or who people who saw the ghosts in like the supernatural events, like the Ouija board, if it's called, I forget. Mm, there's a word for it. I forget what it's called, but it's kind of a thing where someone they see an event they can't explain, and then
Mm-hmm.
someone explains the event, gives it a title or something, and then everyone in the group all agrees on the title, and then they all come up with the same story about it, and they communal reinforcement. That's what it's called.
Yeah,
So I
I
mean,
mean,
do you accept the eyewitness testimony in those cases for what they're saying, or do you just say it's some kind of an event?
well, I can't say I've ever reported on anything like that. I just haven't. Um, but I do, if there's credible witnesses, what I try to do as a reporter is keep an open mind. And I try, and then I report and I allow people to draw their own conclusions because it's not my job to tell people what to think. I give them the evidence. But if I found a credible story of something like that that had multiple witnesses and whatever, would I consider that worthy of reporting? Yeah, if they had credible witnesses. Um, but again, this isn't like a one time hallucination thing. This is walking out through their life and multiple appearances by Jesus to his disciples. Um, so, but here's the thing: what I'm seeing you say is this evidence doesn't fit my worldview, and because it doesn't fit my worldview, I'm going to reject it.
Well, I'm not trying to say that because from my perspective, the accounts in the Bible seem a whole lot like the accounts of things not in the Bible, that other examples we see around the world, and it seems to me that it's more likely that those are the same than that the Bible was something special when it's essentially making the same kinds of claims as far as I can tell. Like I wouldn't mind there being a supernatural thing. I think the supernatural is testable. You could demonstrate it if it existed, and I wouldn't, and I don't
Mm-hmm,
say there is no supernatural. It could obviously be out there. I just don't know about it. So
mm-hmm.
from my perspective, it's more that the things that are claimed in the Bible and the Gospels seem pretty much exactly like the things claimed by lots of people all over the world all the time.
So
And
tell me one religion that is based on a historical fact that people espoused and actually suffered and died for.
um, Jainism, Buddhism, Hinduism,
No, well, now what's the historical fact in Buddhism?
well, they claim that there is a guy named Buddha, and
Yeah, you're
there's,
right, right, right. But not that yeah, yeah. There's a guy named Buddha, just like there's a guy named Jesus. But the actual claim of their faith, I believe that there was a Buddha. It doesn't make me a Buddhist. Is there a religion out there that the actual claims of the religion are rooted in historical fact?
well, yeah, all of those are. They're all grounded in historical events that took place, and then from my perspective, they interpreted those to be mythic events, just like Christianity did. It's usually
Well,
spread out a bunch of
what
them,
is
not
it?
usually just one.
What
We
is?
just,
I mean, if you go like Muhammad, if you go, he's dead, right? He didn't resurrect. None of them resurrected. None of them, right? None of them did anything that proves the authenticity of their faith, right?
well,
They
Muhammad
just
actually,
espoused it.
to use the example of Muhammad, he rose to
Yeah,
heaven on a winged horse. He cut the moon in half, apparently. So
right. And who saw that besides Muhammad?
I have no idea. Not that familiar with the text, but it is rooted in a claimed historical event.
What? But that's the thing. Their claims that he had a vision where supposedly Gabriel appeared to him, right, and told him all this stuff. It's not falsifiable. It's not a historical event. We don't have a historical event of Muhammad going on a winged horse somewhere. Nobody else saw that. Nobody else can testify to that. That is it. It's like if I told you that I had an angelic appearance last night. right? I mean, I can't prove that. You can't prove it's wrong. I can't prove it's right. But if I say, it's like producing. It would be like any historical event. It would be like JFK getting shot, right? People saw it. It actually happened. And if I would get up several years after JFK was shot and say it never happened, you'd say that's ridiculous. We saw it. If these disciples would say Jesus never rose from the dead, or that there's 500 never happened, and there were 500 people who saw it happen. Again, it's a historical event. This is unique. There isn't another religion that says it. There's nothing similar in any religion where the actual miraculous claim is based and rooted in a historical event.
Well, I'm not sure what you mean by that because Muhammad existed. He was a historical figure, and there are lots of historical events around him. So I mean, I think you're focusing on like one particular miracle that's claimed to be the historical event, where most religions have it be multiple miracles spread out across a wide range of historical events. So I don't know why you're saying it has to be one particular one when other religions can spread it out across many different ones. I don't know. I don't understand the difference there.
Well, the difference is the resurrection is the linchpin. It's where everything rises or falls on, right? And no other religion has a claim like that. Now, I guess they can claim some miracles. That's true. Um, I don't know that any other religion has, you know, a group of people who says they saw that miracle and ended up dying for, that same miracle. I just can't think of anything even remotely similar to the resurrection in any religion. There is no religion where the leader is claimed to have been resurrected from the dead. There just isn't. It's a unique claim, and it is unique in the fact that the disciples all died for it. I don't, and I can't think of another religion where the followers died for something they either knew was true or false. I can't think of one.
Well, I've talked with like professional historians on this, and there are a number of religions that make those kinds of claims from my perspective, and I'd be interested to hear your thoughts on those. I could send you the links to those other religions that do seem to have claims of uh, their their leaders dying and rising, because there's a number of them throughout history, and there's a number of religions where people have claimed to see a whole bunch of people have claimed to see miraculous events which support their religion. It's usually more than one. They usually don't put it a linchpin on one particular event, like
Mm-hmm,
the resurrection of Jesus. Usually several of them,
mm-hmm.
because usually their leader doesn't die right away. He does a couple of miracles, then
Yeah.
dies later in the future. So there's usually several historical events. So I'd definitely be interested in hearing your thoughts on those, because from my perspective, they seem about the same. I don't see there's much difference other than the fact Christianity is just one as opposed to the many. And Christianity is multiple too, like Jesus turning water into wine and doing the bread and the fish. So there's multiple historical accounts of Jesus's miracles as well.
Yeah, but you can't prove any of them. I think the resurrection is the one that you either can or can't. I mean, it has the most evidence for it. But I don't even know. I'm not familiar with other religions where they have resurrections and alleged witnesses for those resurrections, and then those witnesses ending up suffering and dying for believing in that resurrection.
Well, yeah, the resurrection would be unique to Christianity, but there are other beliefs and other miracles that religions see happen, and people who die for those miracles. That's a pretty common thing, actually.
Yeah, I'd have to see that, and especially a group of people that all saw the same miracle dying for the belief in that miracle. I'm not aware of that, so I mean, I'm open. If you got evidence, I'll take a look at it. I'm always open to such things.
Awesome. Well, I've kept you for about an hour. It's been a great interview. I really appreciate you coming on. I really enjoy talking with you and hearing your story. So thanks for sharing with me.
Yeah, Tom, I enjoyed talking with you too. It was great to get to know you a little bit.
Absolutely. I'll talk to you again later. But I'm hungry. I'm gonna get some food. So
All
I'll
right, you
let you
do
go.
that. All right. Bye, Tom.